In the vast and unforgiving universe of Warhammer 40,000, few events have shaken the galaxy as profoundly as the Psychic Awakening. This epical series of events, often referred to as the Age of Witches, marked a pivotal chapter in the Imperium of man's tumultuous history and beyond. It was an era where the immaterium bled into reality, bringing with it unprecedented power, insidious corruption, and the potential for both salvation and annihilation. For millennia, Psykers, individuals gifted or cursed with the ability to channel the warp's chaotic energies, have existed on the fringes of the Imperium. To many, they were an asset, a necessary tool in mankind's endless struggle for survival. To others, they were an existential threat, a crack in the psychic dam holding back the tides of chaos. But during the Psychic Awakening, these psychic phenomena reached an intensity that no one could have foreseen. Across the galaxy, billions of individuals found their dormant psychic abilities ignited, and the consequences were as varied as they were catastrophic. This was not merely a time of psychic manifestation, but an era of revelation. Each of the galaxy's major factions was drawn into the maelstrom as the boundaries between the material and immaterial realms grew perilously thin. The Imperium of man, already teetering under the weight of its own decay, was forced to confront the full breadth of its reliance on Psykers while battling the internal schisms such reliance inevitably caused. The Eldar, long accustomed to the tides of the warp, found their ancient plans thrust into chaos, while the orcs and necrons revealed unexpected nuances in their response to the burgeoning psychic tide. Even the Tyranids, a force of biological consumption, demonstrated an unnerving capacity to adapt. But at the heart of this cosmic upheaval lay the question of destiny. Was the Psychic Awakening a random cosmic event? Or was it a manifestation of the Emperor's long-dormant will? Perhaps it was a symptom of the galaxy's impending doom, a sign that the warp's encroachment had reached the point of no return. Regardless, its impact was felt across all sectors, from the decaying hive cities of the Imperium to the verdant death worlds of xenos species. As this age unfolded, the narrative threads intertwined in ways no historian could have predicted. Sects within the Imperium vied for control, with the Inquisition, Adeptus Astartes, and Astra Militarum all pursuing their own agendas. The return of ancient heroes and the rise of new villains gave hope to some and despair to others. The Eldar's ancient prophecies clashed with the harsh realities of a galaxy descending into madness, while the servants of chaos reveled in the growing psychic turbulence, exploiting every crack in the Imperium's fragile armor. Yet, in the midst of all this chaos, there were moments of astonishing unity and clarity. Forces that had long been bitter enemies were compelled to cooperate, if only briefly, as the tides of the warp threatened to engulf them all. These alliances, though fragile, demonstrated the potential for resistance against the encroaching darkness. The Psychic Awakening was not a single event, but a series of cascading crises, each pushing the galaxy closer to an existential tipping point. The narratives that emerged from this era are as diverse as the factions involved. Some saw it as a prelude to the Imperium's final collapse, others as an opportunity for renewal. But for all its chaos and destruction, it was also a time of unparalleled discovery and transformation. As we delve deeper into this turbulent chapter of galactic history, we will explore the key players, the pivotal moments, and the mysteries that remain unsolved. The Psychic Awakening was not just a conflict, it was a test of will, faith, and survival on a galactic scale, and its consequences will shape the 41st millennium for ages to come. The realization of the growing number of Psykers across the galaxy was not an isolated epiphany, but a series of interconnected revelations experienced by diverse factions, each interpreting the phenomenon through the lens of their own beliefs, priorities, and existential struggles. Among the first to recognize and respond to the burgeoning psychic tide were the Imperium of man's governing bodies, particularly the Adeptus Administratum, the Inquisition, and the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. These entities, long accustomed to monitoring psyker activity, found themselves overwhelmed by reports of unprecedented psychic outbursts from every corner of the galaxy. The Inquisition, ever vigilant for signs of heresy and corruption, took a leading role in identifying the implications of this sudden spike. Inquisitors within the Ordo Hereticus, tasked with rooting out rogue psykers and witches, were among the first to notice patterns in the reports. Worlds that had once been bastions of stability now suffered from widespread psychic instability, often accompanied by demonic incursions or inexplicable disasters. To them, this was not merely a troubling anomaly, it was a dire warning. Entire conclaves of inquisitors convened in secret, debating whether the Emperor's divine will was manifesting through these psykers, or if the ruinous powers were orchestrating a galaxy-wide infiltration. The adeptus astra telepathica, charged with the training and regulation of psykers, faced an equally daunting challenge. Sanctuaries designed to house and educate psykers quickly became overcrowded, with thousands of new initiates arriving in numbers that exceeded their capacity to process, let alone train. Senior psykers within the Scholastica Psychana began to report that the warp itself felt more volatile, more aggressive than ever before. This increase in psychic activity stretched their resources thin, forcing them to make grim decisions about which psykers to save and which to consign to the black ships for the Emperor's sustenance. The Adeptus Mechanicus, while generally skeptical of phenomena tied to the warp, could not ignore the implications for their technological dominance. They began their own investigations into the surge in psyker numbers, driven by a mixture of scientific curiosity and paranoia. The tech priests viewed this as a potential disruption to the Imperium's stability and sought ways to harness or suppress this psychic awakening. Explorator fleets were dispatched to ancient vaults and xenos ruins in search of lost technologies that could control or amplify psychic energy, though their efforts often led to disastrous encounters with chaos-tainted artifacts. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's transhuman warriors, found themselves torn between their martial pragmatism and their disdain for psychic power. Chapters with a long history of using librarians, such as the Blood Ravens and Thousand Sons successor chapters, embraced the increase in psykers as a boon. They saw it as an opportunity to bolster their ranks with more powerful librarians capable of turning the tide in battle. Other chapters, such as the Black Templars, viewed the phenomenon as an abomination and a direct threat to the purity of mankind. Their crusades intensified, targeting not only rogue psykers, but also imperial organizations that sought to protect them. Beyond the Imperium, the Eldar, as the galaxy's most attuned psykers, felt the shift in the warp acutely. The Farseers of Craftworld Ulthway, in particular, foresaw the growing tide of psychic energy and its potential to reshape the galaxy. To the Eldar, this was both a curse and an opportunity. The psychic awakening of humanity threatened to destabilize the precarious balance between the material realm and the warp, increasing the risk of Slanesh's predation. At the same time, it offered a chance for the Eldar to manipulate these burgeoning psykers for their own inscrutable plans. Eldar emissaries reached out to human psykers in secret, offering cryptic guidance and warnings, though their true motives remained unclear. The servants of chaos, ever watchful for cracks in the fabric of reality, were quick to exploit the situation. The chaos gods reveled in the explosion of psychic energy, each seeking to twist it to their purposes. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, saw the psychic awakening as a golden opportunity to weave his schemes into the minds of billions. Cults dedicated to Tzeentch sprang up like wildfire, infiltrating hive cities and imperial institutions alike. These cults were often led by charismatic rogue psykers, whose newfound powers made them formidable agents of chaos. Even the orcs, typically indifferent to such subtle shifts in the warp, displayed an unusual reaction. Weird boys, the orc psykers, began to experience surges of power far beyond their usual chaotic bursts. This increase in psychic energy made Orc Wah, bands even more dangerous, as weird boys could now channel their destructive potential with unprecedented precision. Some Imperial observers theorized that the orcs were unconsciously drawing strength from the warp's turbulence, further complicating efforts to contain the crisis. The necrons, ancient enemies of all things psychic, were perhaps the most alarmed by the awakening. Their disdain for the warp and all its manifestations compelled them to take decisive action. The cryptex, necron technosorcerers, devised strategies to dampen psychic energy on worlds under their control, erecting vast pylons designed to suppress the warp's influence. However, these measures often brought them into direct conflict with the Imperium, whose psykers viewed such interference as an existential threat. Each faction approached the growing number of psykers with its own agenda, but all understood that this was no ordinary phenomenon. The galaxy was changing, and the surge in psychic activity was not merely a symptom, but a catalyst for a new era of conflict and transformation. From the desperate councils of Terra to the shadowed chambers of xenos empires, the realization was clear. The psychic awakening was upon them, and none would remain untouched. The origins of the psychic awakening can be traced back to the very foundations of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, shaped by millennia of intertwined events, both natural and artificial. To understand why this phenomenon emerged when it did, one must delve into the currents of galactic history, the nature of the warp, and the relentless progression of the Emperor's design, both intentional and inadvertent. At its core, the warp is a mirror of sentient thought, emotion, and ambition. As the galaxy's population swelled over millennia, so too did the psychic turbulence within the immaterium. Every cry of despair, surge of hope, or pang of fear added to the vast ocean of raw psychic energy. Empires rose and fell, wars ignited and extinguished, yet the psychic imprint of these events continued to ripple through the warp. This accumulation reached a breaking point in the 41st millennium, as centuries of escalating conflict and unchecked human expansion created a psychic pressure that could no longer be contained. One of the pivotal precursors to the psychic awakening was the Imperium's reliance on psykers as a cornerstone of its survival. The Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic beacon, required the sacrifice of countless psykers to sustain its light, guiding ships through the warp. This systemic use of psykers created a paradox. The Imperium needed them to survive, yet feared their uncontrolled proliferation. Over time, the black ships of the adeptus astra telepathica became strained by the sheer number of psykers being discovered. Entire planets, once thought devoid of significant psychic potential, began reporting unprecedented numbers of individuals exhibiting psychic abilities. This phenomenon grew more frequent as the Great Rift tore through the galaxy, fracturing reality itself. The creation of the Great Rift, also known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, was a cataclysmic event that set the stage for the psychic awakening. This massive tear in the fabric of reality, formed during Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade, split the galaxy in two, exposing countless systems to the raw fury of the warp. Entire sectors found themselves engulfed in warp storms, their populations subjected to the unfiltered energies of chaos. For many, this exposure unlocked latent psychic abilities, triggering uncontrolled outbursts that ranged from harmless manifestations to catastrophic phenomena capable of annihilating entire cities. The Great Rift also amplified the presence of chaos, further destabilizing the warp. The Chaos Gods, ever hungry for domination, saw this instability as an opportunity to expand their influence. Tzeentch, in particular, played a central role, manipulating events to unleash a wave of psychic potential across the galaxy. His schemes seeded doubt and ambition among mortal psykers, subtly encouraging them to explore their newfound powers without understanding the dangers they posed. Meanwhile, Khorne, Slaanesh, and Nurgle exploited the psychic turmoil to spread their respective dominions, ensuring that no part of the galaxy remained untouched by the growing chaos. Another crucial precursor was the gradual awakening of ancient xenos powers. The necrons, long dormant beneath the surfaces of countless worlds, began reactivating their tombs in response to the escalating psychic activity. Their hatred of the warp, rooted in their ancient war with the Old Ones, drove them to suppress this awakening through their advanced technology. Yet their efforts often had unintended consequences, disrupting the fragile balance between the material realm and the immaterium. Meanwhile, the Eldar, whose psychic resonance with the warp is unparalleled, attempted to mitigate the growing instability. Farseers and warlocks undertook dangerous rituals to predict and contain the fallout, but their actions often collided with those of other factions, creating further tension. A less understood but equally critical factor was the Tyranid menace. The hive mind, though primarily a biological force, displayed a disturbing adaptability to psychic phenomena. As Tyranid fleets encountered worlds rich in psychic potential, they began absorbing and amplifying these energies in ways that baffled Imperial scholars. Some theorized that the hive mind was evolving to exploit the warp more directly, a prospect that terrified even the most hardened strategists of the Imperium. Lastly, the Emperor's long-dormant presence played a subtle but significant role. While confined to the Golden Throne, his psychic influence continued to shape the galaxy in ways both direct and indirect. Some within the ecclesiarchy believed that the sudden surge in Psykers was a manifestation of the Emperor's will, a divine response to humanity's darkest hour. Others feared it was a sign of his failing strength, with the warp encroaching on his protective light. Regardless, the Emperor's role in the psychic awakening remains one of the great mysteries of the era, as even the most devout servants of the Imperium struggled to interpret its meaning. Taken together, these factors created a perfect storm. The psychic awakening was not the result of a single event or actor, but a culmination of countless threads woven into the fabric of galactic history. The Great Rift shattered the barriers between realms, ancient powers reasserted their influence, and the inherent nature of the warp responded to the escalating turmoil of the material world. In this volatile crucible, the latent psychic potential of countless beings was ignited, setting the stage for an era of unparalleled conflict and transformation. The psychic awakening unfolded across the galaxy in a series of escalating events, each more dramatic and far-reaching than the last. These stages were not confined to a single timeline or location, but instead manifested in overlapping waves, affecting different regions and factions in unique ways. The resulting chaos redefined the galactic order, forging alliances, igniting conflicts, and revealing long-hidden truths. The initial signs of the psychic awakening were subtle but widespread. Isolated reports of spontaneous psychic phenomena began to trickle in from across the Imperium. On many worlds, individuals with no known history of psychic ability suddenly exhibited powers, often to disastrous effect. Hive cities experienced uncontrolled warp breaches as latent psykers accidentally tore through the veil of reality. Small-scale warp storms flared unpredictably, cutting off entire systems from the wider galaxy. At first, these incidents were dismissed as random anomalies or localized corruption. However, as the frequency and intensity of these events increased, it became clear that something far greater was unfolding. The second stage of the psychic awakening coincided with the rise of the Great Rift. As the cicatrix maledictum cleaved the galaxy in two, its psychic turbulence ignited latent abilities on an unprecedented scale. Entire populations found themselves inundated with psychic energy, leading to mass hysteria, uncontrolled mutations, and widespread demonic incursions. Worlds that had remained stable for centuries were plunged into anarchy as the warp bled into reality. The Imperium's response was uneven at best. On some planets, the adeptus arbites and the ecclesiarchy worked tirelessly to maintain order, while on others, panic and superstition led to witch hunts and mass executions of suspected psykers. During this period, many factions began to recognize the strategic implications of the psychic awakening. The Ordo Hereticus intensified its operations, dispatching fleets of black ships to capture rogue psykers and secure the Imperium's dwindling grip on psychic control. The adeptus mechanicus, ever pragmatic, sought to study and exploit the phenomena, establishing research facilities on psychic hotspots despite the inherent risks. At the same time, the Eldar, deeply attuned to the warp's fluctuations, launched covert missions to identify and influence key psykers, hoping to manipulate the tides of fate to their advantage. The third stage was marked by open conflict as the psychic awakening exacerbated existing tensions across the galaxy. Sects and cults dedicated to chaos exploited the growing psychic unrest to expand their influence, leading to a surge in heretical uprisings. Entire systems fell to chaos, their populations corrupted by demonic forces. Loyalist forces struggled to contain the spread, often resorting to exterminatus when all other options failed. The Imperium was not alone in its struggles. The Necrons, seeing the psychic turbulence as a direct threat to their plans, began deploying their advanced anti-warp technologies on a massive scale. These efforts brought them into direct conflict with Imperial forces, particularly in sectors where Necron tomb worlds overlapped with psyker-rich human colonies. The fourth stage saw the emergence of heroes and villains whose actions defined the psychic awakening. Among the most notable were Inquisitor Katarina Greyfax, who spearheaded efforts to purge rogue psykers while navigating the political quagmire of the Imperium's response, and Yvraine, the prophet of Aeneid, whose influence among the Eldar reshaped their involvement in the conflict. The actions of these and other key figures created ripples that extended far beyond their immediate spheres of influence. For every psyker who rose to prominence as a savior, there was another who succumbed to the corrupting lure of chaos, becoming a living conduit for the ruinous powers. As the awakening reached its apex, the galaxy entered a period of unprecedented flux. Entire sectors were transformed by the intensity of psychic activity. On some worlds, the unleashing of latent psychic potential brought about rapid technological and cultural advancement, with psykers becoming central to governance and defense. On others, the same phenomena led to catastrophic collapse as demonic forces overwhelmed unprepared populations. The Imperium, fractured by internal divisions and external threats, teetered on the brink of collapse. Yet, amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of hope. New alliances were forged, ancient technologies rediscovered, and forgotten truths unearthed. The final stage of the psychic awakening was one of consolidation and reckoning. As the initial wave of chaos subsided, factions across the galaxy began to assess the long-term implications of the event. For the Imperium, this meant redoubling efforts to control psyker populations and reinforce the Emperor's light against the encroaching darkness. The Eldar, having glimpsed both the potential and peril of the awakening, reevaluated their strategies for survival. The forces of chaos, emboldened by their successes, prepared for even greater offensives. Meanwhile, enigmatic forces such as the Necrons and the Tyranids adjusted their plans in response to the shifting galactic landscape. These stages of the psychic awakening were not merely episodes of chaos and conflict, but turning points that reshaped the destiny of the galaxy. Each stage built upon the last, creating a cascading effect that reverberated across time and space. As the dust began to settle, it became clear that the galaxy had entered a new age, one defined by the boundless potential and unrelenting dangers of psychic power. The psychic awakening reached its critical turning point during an event that has since become a dark legend within the annals of galactic history: the fall of Kaelor. This catastrophic moment was not only a defining instance of the uncontrolled psychic tide, but also a confluence of ambition, desperation, and the deadly interplay of opposing forces, each vying to shape the galaxy in their favor. At the heart of this event was a single psyker, whose latent power and tragic fate became emblematic of the entire era. Kaelor, an Eldar craft world known for its precarious balance between tradition and innovation, became the focal point of an escalating psychic maelstrom. The craft world's Seer Council, led by the revered Farseer Tarialis, had long foreseen a confluence of warp energies converging on their domain. Despite their efforts to avert disaster through rituals and alliances, the confluence arrived with unstoppable force, bringing with it a wave of psychic instability that rippled outward across the galaxy. The Eldar, though masters of the psychic arts, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the event. The spark of this disaster lay in the emergence of Lianthera, a young human psyker whose abilities far exceeded anything previously documented among her kind. Born on the fringe world of Sarian 7, Lianthera had lived a life of obscurity until her psychic powers manifested in an uncontrollable burst that destroyed her entire settlement and opened a warp rift in its place. The explosion of energy drew the attention of numerous factions, each with their own designs on her unprecedented potential. Among them were the Ordo Hereticus, the Thousand Suns Chaos Space Marines, and an enigmatic splinter group of the Inari. Lianthera's escape from Sarian 7 set off a galaxy-spanning pursuit. The forces of chaos sought to corrupt her, seeing her as a conduit to magnify the power of the warp. The Imperium aimed to contain and exploit her abilities, while the Inari believed she was a key to awakening Iniad, the Eldar god of the dead. It was the Inari who ultimately succeeded in spiriting her away to Kaelor, believing the craft world's psychic infrastructure would stabilize her volatile powers and protect her from the ruinous powers. What followed was a convergence of apocalyptic proportions. As Lianthera's presence on Kaelor intensified the psychic turbulence, the craft world became a beacon for warp entities and their mortal servants. The Thousand Suns, led by a demon prince of Tsench known as Kalpiros the Shifting, launched a massive assault on Kaelor, seeking to claim Lianthera for their patron. Simultaneously, the Ordo Hereticus dispatched a fleet to the craft world, led by the uncompromising Inquisitor Albrecht Forlan. Each faction was determined to gain control of Lianthera, regardless of the cost. The battle that erupted was unlike any other. Kaelor's webway defenses, designed to repel intruders, faltered under the combined assault of chaos sorcery and imperial firepower. As the Thousand Suns unleashed waves of demons and psychic storms, the craft world's defenders fought valiantly, their psychic might matched only by their desperation. The Inari, caught between defending Kaelor and protecting Lianthera, found their efforts increasingly futile. Meanwhile, Vorlin's forces tore through the craft world with cold efficiency, exterminating anything deemed a potential threat to the Imperium's purity. The pivotal moment came when Lianthera, driven to the brink by the psychic chaos around her, experienced a catastrophic surge of power. Her psychic scream resonated across the warp, temporarily disrupting the immaterium and severing countless demonic connections. The shockwave obliterated both friend and foe, annihilating Kalpiros and his demon hordes while also devastating Kaelor's population and infrastructure. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the galaxy itself had held its breath, caught in the wake of her unimaginable power. Yet the aftermath of this event revealed its true significance. Lianthera's outburst had not only obliterated the immediate threats, but also destabilized the surrounding warp space, creating a cascading effect that amplified psychic activity across neighboring systems. Kaelor, once a bastion of Eldar culture, was left a shattered husk, its surviving inhabitants scattered and leaderless. Lianthera herself vanished in the aftermath, her ultimate fate unknown. Some believe she was consumed by her own power, while others claim she transcended mortal existence, becoming a beacon within the warp. The fall of Kaelor marked a turning point for every faction involved. The Imperium, shaken by the scale of the disaster, redoubled its efforts to control Psykers, enacting draconian measures to prevent another such catastrophe. The Thousand Suns, though defeated, were emboldened by the demonstration of psychic potential, seeing it as a prelude to greater upheaval. The Eldar, already a dying race, suffered yet another grievous blow, forcing them to reconsider their strategies for survival. And the Inari, though devastated by the loss of Kaelor, saw the event as a grim validation of their belief in the power of Iniad. More broadly, the fall of Kaelor exposed the fragile balance between the material and immaterial realms, a balance that had been irrevocably altered by the psychic awakening. The event was a stark reminder that no faction, no matter how powerful or ancient, could escape the consequences of this turbulent era. As the galaxy reeled from the shock waves of Kylor's fall, it became clear that the psychic awakening was not merely an era of psychic proliferation, but a harbinger of transformations yet to come. The aftermath of the psychic awakening reshaped the galaxy in profound and enduring ways, leaving no faction or system untouched by its effects. The sudden surge in psychic activity created ripple effects that altered the balance of power, rewrote strategies, and forced every civilization to adapt to a galaxy where the boundaries between the material and immaterial had become perilously thin. For the Imperium of Man, the consequences were both immediate and far-reaching. The explosion in the number of Psykers placed enormous strain on the adeptus astra telepathica and the black ships tasked with rounding up these individuals. Worlds that had long been compliant with Imperial mandates now bristled with resentment as families and communities were torn apart by the enforced psyker tithes. In some sectors, entire planets rose in rebellion, their populations viewing the Imperium not as a protector, but as an oppressor exploiting their psychic kin. These uprisings were further exacerbated by the infiltration of chaos cults, which offered an alternative, albeit destructive, vision of freedom for emerging psykers. Within the Imperium's hierarchy, the increased reliance on psykers created fractures among its ruling bodies. The ecclesiarchy, traditionally wary of psykers despite its reverence for the Emperor's psychic light, clashed with the Inquisition over how to manage the growing numbers. Some Inquisitors viewed the awakening as an opportunity to strengthen the Imperium by harnessing psykers' potential, while others saw it as an existential threat requiring purgation. This division spilled into the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Astra Militarum, where differing views on psyker integration into their ranks created further discord. At the highest levels, the High Lords of Terra struggled to maintain unity as conflicting ideologies threatened to destabilize the Imperium's already fragile governance. The psychic turbulence also had a profound impact on the warp itself, further destabilizing an already volatile realm. The Great Rift, already a gaping wound in reality, expanded in unpredictable ways, swallowing entire star systems and creating new warp storms. Travel and communication across the galaxy became even more treacherous, isolating regions for years or even centuries. The Astronomicon, though still functional, flickered more frequently, causing waves of panic across the Imperium. Some whispered that the Emperor's light was dimming, a sign that the burden of sustaining the Imperium was proving too great even for him. For the xenos factions, the consequences of the psychic awakening were equally transformative. The Eldar, as psychic beings intrinsically tied to the warp, bore the brunt of the awakening's fallout. The rise in psychic activity increased Slaanesh's predation upon their souls, forcing them to adopt even more extreme measures to protect themselves. Craft worlds redoubled their reliance on spirit stones, while the Inari found their ranks swelling with desperate Eldar seeking salvation through Iniad. However, the Inari's growing prominence also deepened the rift between them and the traditionalist factions of the Eldar, leading to bitter internal conflicts that weakened their collective strength. The Necrons, ancient foes of all things psychic, viewed the awakening as both a threat and an opportunity. While they intensified their efforts to suppress psychic energy using their anti-warp technologies, they also began targeting psyker-rich worlds for extermination. Necron overlords, long dormant, awakened to lead brutal campaigns against both the Imperium and other factions, seeking to reassert their dominion over the galaxy. Their actions, while calculated, often had unintended consequences, further destabilizing regions already on the brink of collapse. The Orcs, who thrived on chaos, found the increase in psychic energy to be a boon. Weird Boys, their naturally psychic individuals, became more powerful than ever, leading to larger and more destructive Wah. Campaigns. These surges of orc activity disrupted Imperial supply lines, destroyed key fortifications, and left entire sectors in ruins. However, the unpredictable nature of orc psykers also led to spontaneous warp rifts and other phenomena that inadvertently aided chaos forces, creating a chaotic feedback loop of destruction. For the Tyranids, the psychic awakening posed a unique challenge. The hive mind, though anathema to the warp's chaotic nature, displayed an uncanny ability to adapt to the rising psychic tide. Tyranid fleets began exhibiting behaviors that suggested an increasing capacity to weaponize psychic energy, from more potent synapse creatures to devastating psychic assaults. This adaptation alarmed Imperial and Xenos scholars alike, as it indicated that the Tyranids were evolving to exploit the very instability that threatened to consume the galaxy. The forces of chaos, particularly Tzeentch, reveled in the turmoil. The increase in psychic activity provided fertile ground for corruption, with rogue psykers and chaos cults rising in unprecedented numbers. The ruinous powers exploited every crack in the Imperium's defenses, orchestrating large-scale incursions and destabilizing key sectors. Demon worlds flourished within the Great Rift, their influence spilling into the material realm with terrifying regularity. The chaos unleashed by the awakening further strengthened the ruinous powers, emboldening them for even larger campaigns against the galaxy's remaining bastions of resistance. Despite the widespread destruction and instability, the psychic awakening also sparked a renaissance of sorts, albeit a grim and fleeting one. New technologies and tactics emerged as factions scrambled to adapt to the new psychic reality. The Imperium, though fractured, developed more advanced methods of controlling and utilizing psykers, including psychic null fields and experimental anti-warp weapons. The Eldar and Inari uncovered ancient techniques once thought lost, while the Necrons refined their already formidable arsenal. Even amidst the chaos, glimmers of innovation and resilience shone through, demonstrating the galaxy's capacity to endure even the direst of circumstances. Ultimately, the psychic awakening left the galaxy in a state of precarious transformation. It was a time of immense danger and opportunity, where the actions of individuals and factions could tilt the scales toward salvation or destruction. As the galaxy continued to reel from its effects, one thing was certain: the boundaries of what was possible had been irrevocably expanded, and the galaxy would never be the same. The psychic awakening not only reshaped the balance of power, but also catalyzed an unprecedented era of technological and tactical evolution across the galaxy. Each faction, faced with the growing proliferation of psykers and the destabilized warp, sought to develop new tools, strategies, and adaptations to harness or counteract these profound changes. These innovations often blur the line between science, sorcery, and desperation, reflecting the unique character of the factions that birthed them. The Imperium of Man, driven by necessity, was forced to expand its already formidable arsenal of psychic control measures. The Adeptus Mechanicus took the lead in developing new forms of psychic inhibitors, field-generating devices capable of suppressing or nullifying psychic powers in localized areas. These devices, often installed on battlefields or aboard black ships, created zones of relative safety from warp interference, although their deployment was fraught with risk. The technology was prone to catastrophic failure, often resulting in uncontrolled warp breaches, yet it became a cornerstone of the Imperium's psychic strategy. Another key development was the enhancement of the Calexis Assassin program. These assassins, trained and equipped with specialized anti-psyker weaponry, were deployed in greater numbers during the psychic awakening. Their signature technology, the Animus Speculum, was upgraded to amplify its disruptive effects, allowing them to target multiple psykers simultaneously. The Calexis assassins became both feared and revered across the galaxy, their presence on the battlefield a harbinger of doom for any psyker who opposed the Imperium. The Scholastica Psychina, the organization responsible for training Imperial psykers, also underwent significant changes. Recognizing the need for more advanced psychic warfare, they introduced rigorous training regimens that emphasized battlefield application. This included the use of newly developed psychic foci, devices designed to enhance a psyker's ability to channel and control their powers. These artifacts, crafted by the tech priests of Mars, incorporated fragments of blackstone, a rare material known for its anti-warp properties, allowing sanctioned psykers to resist the corrupting influence of the warp while amplifying their offensive capabilities. Among the xenos, the Eldar once again demonstrated their mastery of the psychic arts. The craft worlds, recognizing the increased predation of Slanesh, began deploying wraithbone resonators, constructs that stabilized psychic energy within a given area. These devices, often shaped like towering spires, created harmonic fields that both shielded Eldar psykers from the warp's chaos and amplified their precision in battle. The resonance also had the added benefit of calming nearby populations, reducing the risk of psychic outbursts in vulnerable areas. The Inari, ever tied to the nascent god Ennead, developed unique weapons and rituals to channel the growing psychic tide. Chief among these were the Soul Binders, psionic artifacts capable of tethering a psyker's consciousness to the souls of fallen Eldar. This connection allowed the psyker to draw upon the collective wisdom and power of the dead, creating an immensely potent force in battle. However, the use of these devices was not without cost, as prolonged exposure often led to the psyker's eventual spiritual dissolution. The Necrons, viewing the rise of psychic phenomena as an existential threat, unleashed some of their most ancient and advanced technologies. Nullification pylons, long buried on forgotten worlds, were activated en masse, creating vast zones where the warp's influence was completely eradicated. These pylons not only disrupted psychic abilities, but also rendered demonic incursions impossible, making them invaluable tools against chaos forces. In addition to the pylons, the cryptex engineered chronomantic disruptors, devices that interfered with the temporal flow of psychic energies, effectively severing a psyker's connection to the warp in critical moments. Even the Tyranids adapted to the psychic upheaval, demonstrating the hive mind's unparalleled ability to evolve. New strains of zoanthropes emerged, their cranial structures visibly altered to accommodate enhanced psychic projection. These creatures could unleash devastating warp blasts that rivaled the destructive power of a space marine librarian. The Tyranids also deployed Shadow Brood, specialized organisms that radiated a psychic shroud, suppressing the abilities of enemy psykers within a wide radius. This adaptation made them particularly lethal against factions heavily reliant on psychic powers. The forces of chaos, always eager to exploit instability, unleashed weapons and rituals designed to maximize the psychic chaos. Sentient cults created warp weavers, living conduits that could manipulate the warp to create unpredictable effects on the battlefield. These individuals were often bound to demonic artifacts that amplified their abilities at the cost of their sanity, making them both a terrifying weapon and a liability. Meanwhile, Khorne's hatred for psykers manifested in new demon forges, where weapons imbued with psychic nullification properties were crafted. These weapons, wielded by Khornada champions, became the bane of psykers across the galaxy. The Orcs, as always, approached the psychic awakening with a mix of ingenuity and chaos. Weird boys, already unpredictable, began wielding Wah, amplifiers, cobbled together devices that channeled the collective psychic energy of nearby orcs. The results were wildly inconsistent, ranging from devastating psychic explosions to bizarre transformations of the battlefield itself, but always devastating to their enemies. The orcs' natural resilience to warp corruption allowed them to experiment with these devices without the same level of catastrophic consequences faced by other factions. The proliferation of these technologies and tactics during the Psychic Awakening reflected the galaxy's desperate attempts to adapt to a reality forever altered by the growing presence of psychic power. Each innovation carried its own risks and rewards, often pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible or even wise. Yet in a galaxy where survival demanded constant evolution, these advancements became both a testament to ingenuity and a grim reminder of the price of progress. The psychic awakening was a crucible that forged some of the most extraordinary psykers and individuals in galactic history. These figures, whether through innate talent, sheer force of will, or circumstance, emerged as symbols of hope, despair, and change in a galaxy teetering on the brink of annihilation. Each was a reflection of their faction's ideals, struggles, and the unique challenges posed by the burgeoning psychic tide. One of the most notable psykers to rise during this time was Leonthera of Sarian VII, the young human whose unprecedented psychic potential catalyzed events such as the fall of Kaelor. Her ability to unleash immense psychic energy with devastating precision marked her as both a savior and a harbinger of destruction. Her mysterious disappearance following the cataclysm at Kaelor turned her into a figure of legend, with various factions speculating on her fate. To the Imperium, she became a cautionary tale about the dangers of uncontrolled psychic power. To the Inari, she was whispered to have ascended, becoming a vessel for Aenead's will. Chaos cults, however, claimed she was devoured by the warp and now served as a conduit for Tzeentch's schemes. Regardless of the truth, her name became synonymous with the raw, untamed potential of the psychic awakening. In the Imperium, Inquisitor Albrecht Vorlin rose as a central figure during the crisis. Vorlin, a senior member of the Ordo Hereticus, became infamous for his relentless purges of rogue psykers and warp-tainted populations. His leadership during the suppression of the Chiron subsector uprising, where uncontrolled psychic phenomena turned entire worlds into demon-infested wastelands, was both brutal and effective. Vorlin employed experimental technologies, including psychic nullifiers and excruciators, to contain and neutralize psyker outbreaks. However, his methods, often involving mass executions and planetary-scale purifications, made him a divisive figure. To some, he was a hero who safeguarded humanity from its own excesses. To others, he was a monster who sacrificed countless lives in his crusade for control. Among the Eldar, Farseer Tarialis of Kaelor was a beacon of resilience and insight. As the psychic turbulence began to ripple across the galaxy, Tarialis foresaw the devastating potential of the awakening and worked tirelessly to guide her craft world through the storm. Her mastery of foresight allowed Kaelor to evade numerous threats, but her efforts to stabilize the psychic maelstrom eventually drew the attention of Chaos and the Imperium. Tarialis' leadership during the fall of Kaelor, where she coordinated the defense of the craft world against overwhelming odds, became a testament to her courage and resolve. Despite her death during the climactic battle, her sacrifice inspired countless Eldar to continue the fight, and her name is now spoken with reverence across surviving craft worlds. In the shadows of the Imperium, the radical psyker Elvarus Malkarin, once a sanctioned psyker of the Scholastica Psychina, emerged as a controversial figure. Malkarin, disillusioned with the Imperium's harsh treatment of psykers, defected and founded the Auric Flame, a movement dedicated to fostering psychic unity and independence. His teachings, which emphasized control and cooperation rather than repression, gained traction among rogue psykers and outcasts. Malkarin's growing influence made him a target for the Inquisition, and his fiery confrontations with Imperial forces became the stuff of legend. While some saw him as a liberator offering psykers a better future, others viewed him as a dangerous demagogue whose ideals risked opening the galaxy further to chaos corruption. The forces of chaos also birthed their own champions during this era. Kalpyros the Shifting, a demon prince of Tzeentch, capitalized on the psychic turbulence to sow discord and amplify the warp's influence. His schemes, which involved the corruption of nascent psykers and the subversion of entire planetary governments, culminated in the assault on Kaelor. Though Kalpyros met his end during the conflict, his actions left an enduring legacy of chaos and instability as his cults and servants continued to spread his influence in his absence. From the depths of the Orc Wa arose Zazgar Blastahead, a weird boy whose abilities surged to unprecedented levels during the Awakening. Known for his unpredictable and devastating psychic outbursts, Zazgob became a legend among orc warbands, leading massive campaigns that destabilized entire sectors. His infamous Green Sunda event on the world of Bragus Prime, where his energy created a warp rift that swallowed half the planet, demonstrated the sheer destructive potential of orc psykers during this period. The Necrons, though disdainful of psychic power, produced their own response in the form of Cryptek Varek the Nullifier. Varek, an ancient technomancer, became a leading figure in the deployment of anti-psychic technologies. His innovations, such as the mass production of nullification pylons and the deployment of phase reapers, specialized constructs designed to target psykers, were instrumental in curbing the spread of psychic phenomena in Necron-controlled territories. Varek's relentless campaigns against psykers, particularly on worlds rich in psychic potential, earned him infamy across the galaxy. The Psychic Awakening was a time of extremes, where individuals of great power and influence emerged to shape the galaxy's destiny. Whether celebrated as heroes, vilified as villains, or shrouded in mystery, these figures embodied the era's challenges and opportunities, leaving legacies that would echo across millennia. The Psychic Awakening left behind a tangled web of mysteries and unanswered questions, each as enigmatic and unsettling as the events themselves. These riddles spanned the breadth of the galaxy, touching every faction and igniting debates among scholars, psykers, and leaders alike. Many of these secrets remain locked within the shadows, their truths perhaps too dangerous or too profound to uncover. One of the most pervasive mysteries revolved around the true nature of the Awakening itself. Was this galactic surge in psychic phenomena a natural evolution of the warp's influence, or was it engineered by some unseen hand? Some within the Imperium suggested that it was the Emperor's will manifesting, a final act to bolster humanity against the encroaching darkness. Yet, others whispered a more terrifying possibility, that the ruinous powers, particularly Tzeentch, had orchestrated the Awakening as part of an intricate plan to destabilize the galaxy. The lack of definitive evidence left this question open to interpretation, creating deep rifts among the Imperium's theologians and strategists. The disappearance of Leonthera after the fall of Kaelor became one of the Psychic Awakening's most enduring enigmas. Her sudden vanishing act in the wake of her psychic explosion left no trace, no body, no psychic signature, and no answers. Some claimed she had ascended, her consciousness merging with the immaterium in a way that defied mortal understanding. Others speculated that she had been consumed by the warp or spirited away by a hidden faction, such as the Harlequins or the Alpha Legion. The truth of her fate remains shrouded, and countless expeditions into the warp and Kaelor's ruins have failed to provide clarity. The Great Rift's connection to the Psychic Awakening also remains a subject of intense speculation. While it is clear that the rift exacerbated psychic phenomena, some scholars suggest a deeper link. Could the Awakening have been the final catalyst for the rift's creation rather than its consequence? Certain astropathic transmissions intercepted during the Awakening hinted at an ancient prophecy foretelling such a confluence, but the fragmentary nature of these records has left even the most knowledgeable savants uncertain. The intertwining of these events has fueled countless conspiracy theories, each more outlandish than the last. The Necrons' cryptic response to the Awakening added another layer of intrigue. Their rapid deployment of nullification pylons and anti-warp constructs suggested that they had anticipated this surge in psychic activity long before it occurred. How could a species so removed from the warp have such precise foreknowledge? Some theorists believe that the Necrons' ancient war with the Old Ones had given them insight into the cyclical nature of galactic psychic events. Others speculate that the Satan, fragmented though they are, still influence Necron decisions through residual whispers of their cosmic awareness. The Necrons themselves remain silent on the matter, their motivations as opaque as ever. The rise of the Inari and their connection to Aeneid presented another profound mystery. While the Inari interpreted the psychic turbulence as a sign of Aenead's growing power, many Eldar questioned the timing and intent behind their god's supposed awakening. Why had Aenead not acted earlier, during other moments of psychic upheaval? Furthermore, the Inari's interactions with human psykers during the awakening raised unsettling questions about Aenead's true goals. Was the god of the dead truly aligned with the Eldar's survival, or was it pursuing an agenda far beyond the comprehension of its followers? The lack of clear guidance from Aenead left even the most devoted Inari prophets questioning their purpose. The behavior of the Tyranids during the awakening introduced a particularly chilling mystery. Certain hive fleets, notably Kronos and Leviathan, displayed an uncanny ability to adapt to psychic energy, developing specialized organisms that could harness or nullify it. This rapid evolution sparked fears that the Tyranids had begun to integrate warp-based strategies into their arsenal. However, the true extent of the hive mind's understanding of the warp remains unknown. Could the Tyranids have encountered warp phenomena in other galaxies before arriving in the Milky Way? If so, what horrors might they have already assimilated into their collective consciousness? Another unresolved question centered on the unusual behavior of the orcs, particularly their weird boys. While orc psykers have always been unpredictable, their abilities during the psychic awakening often defied even the loose rules governing orc biology and the Wah energy field. Weird boys began channeling power with far greater precision and intensity, creating phenomena that seemed almost deliberate. Was this a sign of the orcs evolving their own understanding of the warp, or was it evidence of an external force subtly manipulating them? Some Ordo Xenos inquisitors hypothesized that Tzeentch was behind this, while others dismissed it as the natural chaos of orc existence. Finally, the Eldar's ancient prophecies, long a source of guidance and dread, seemed to gain new relevance during the awakening. Farseers reported visions that echoed passages from the Assyrian codices, foretelling a time of great psychic upheaval that would precede the galaxy's ultimate fate. However, these prophecies were maddeningly vague, offering no clear answers about whether the awakening was a prelude to salvation or destruction. Some Eldar claimed the prophecies spoke of the Rana Dandra, the final battle of the galaxy, while others interpreted them as a call to abandon the material realm entirely. These mysteries and others continue to haunt the galaxy, their answers tantalizingly out of reach. They remind every faction, from the most zealous inquisitor to the most enlightened farseer, that the psychic awakening was not merely a series of events, but a harbinger of deeper truths yet to be revealed. The psychic awakening was not merely an event confined to a moment in time. It was a transformative chapter in the galaxy's history that reshaped its trajectory in ways that continue to unfold. As the dust began to settle from the tumultuous eruptions of psychic power, the galaxy found itself irrevocably changed, teetering between annihilation and renewal. The legacies of this era became etched into the fabric of the 41st millennium, influencing every decision, every battle, and every hope for survival. For the Imperium of Man, the psychic awakening became both a dire warning and an unexpected opportunity. The proliferation of psykers, though terrifying in its implications, forced the Imperium to confront its long-standing reliance on psychic power. The Black Ships intensified their efforts, their holds overflowing with psykers destined for the Golden Throne, or the Scholastica Psychina. The adeptus astra telepathica expanded its reach, and new facilities were established to manage the overwhelming influx of psykers. The Imperium's approach to psychic power evolved, balancing between ruthless control and strategic utilization, but the cracks in this strategy were evident. Every new psyker was a potential asset and a potential disaster. The ecclesiarchy adapted its dogma to the changing times, framing the psychic awakening as a test of faith. Priests proclaimed that the Emperor's light would guide humanity through this dark age, even as they sanctioned purges of unregistered psykers and those deemed heretical. The faithful found solace in these proclamations, but whispers of doubt grew louder. Could the Emperor, chained to the Golden Throne, truly protect humanity from a threat so pervasive? The possibility that the awakening signified his diminishing power cast a shadow of dread over the Imperium. The xenos races, too, were left grappling with the aftermath. The Eldar, already diminished, faced ever-increasing challenges as Slaaneş's hunger grew with the intensifying psychic tide. Yet the Inari, with their belief in Iniad's ascension, emerged as a glimmer of hope for their people. Their actions during the awakening revitalized their movement, but at the cost of further dividing the Eldar race. Whether Iniad will truly be the savior, the Inari believe remains an open question. The Necrons, ever enigmatic, quietly reinforced their dominance in key sectors of the galaxy. Their nullification pylons became critical tools in stabilizing regions plagued by psychic turbulence, but their true motives remained hidden. To the Necrons, the psychic awakening was a reminder of the warp's enduring threat, a threat they had sworn to eradicate long ago. Yet their increasing activity raised suspicions among other factions, suggesting that the Necrons' plans extended far beyond mere containment. The Orcs, Tyranids, and Chaos forces thrived in the chaos left by the awakening. Orc Wahs grew larger and more destructive, fueled by the unpredictable power of Weird Boys. The Tyranids adapted with frightening efficiency, incorporating the lessons of the psychic upheaval into their evolutionary strategies. Meanwhile, Chaos cults proliferated, their influence seeping into every corner of the galaxy. The ruinous powers reveled in the disruption, their champions using the awakening as a springboard for even greater conquests. The Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, loomed larger than ever, a bleeding wound that symbolized the galaxy's fractured state. Yet, even amidst the despair and destruction, there were glimmers of resilience. Heroes emerged from the chaos, individuals who embodied the indomitable spirit of their factions. New technologies and alliances arose, forged in the crucible of necessity. The galaxy, though battered, proved its ability to adapt and survive. For every world consumed by the warp, another stood defiant, refusing to yield to the darkness. The psychic awakening left humanity and its rivals standing on a knife's edge. The galaxy now exists in a state of fragile equilibrium, with the potential for unparalleled growth or total collapse. The lessons of the awakening remain clear. The warp is both a source of limitless potential and an existential threat, and every faction must decide how to navigate this paradox. In the end, the psychic awakening was not an end, but a beginning, a harbinger of the struggles and revelations yet to come. The galaxy had entered a new era, where the line between the material and immaterial grew ever thinner, and where every psyker, every war, and every choice carried the weight of destiny. In the grim darkness of the far future, the echoes of this awakening would shape the fate of countless worlds, ensuring that its legacy would never be forgotten.